The campfire crackled and spat embers into the cold night air, sending tendrils of smoke spiraling into the starless sky. The smell of charred wood and damp earth mingled, an oddly comforting scent after a day of exhausting hiking. We were a loose group of climbers, some seasoned, some green, but all gathered by the same love of wilderness and the thrill of conquering peaks. The Appalachian Range was our playground that week, a sprawling tapestry of jagged cliffs and deep valleys. But as the hours crept toward midnight and the firelight began to dwindle, the conversation took a darker turn. "You ever hear about the Whispering Cavern?" asked Neil, the oldest and most experienced among us. He had the kind of voice that commanded attention, gravelly and calm, like a storyteller around a hearth. Most of us shook our heads. I leaned closer, sensing something in his tone that prickled the skin on the back of my neck. "It's just a legend," Neil said, poking at the fire with a stick, sending a flare of sparks upward. "But climbers who've gone looking for it, they don't come back. Or when they do, they're not right. They say it's a cave that isn't really a cave." "How's that work?" one of the younger climbers scoffed. Neil shrugged, his gaze distant. "It's alive, or something close to it. The walls, they listen, they talk back. First, you hear your voice echoing back wrong, maybe too fast, maybe saying things you didn't. Then you hear the voices of others, calling from deeper inside. Friends, family, yourself, stuff that isn't there. And if you follow the echoes too far..." He trailed off, letting the silence fill the void like a cold wind. "Bull," I muttered, trying to laugh it off. "Just an old ghost story." Neil shot me a glance that made my chest tighten. "Maybe, but ghost stories come from somewhere, don't they?" The campfire died down, and we retired to our tents. But as I lay there, cocooned in my sleeping bag, Neil's words wormed their way into my mind. The thought of echoes that didn't belong, voices that twisted the familiar into the alien, sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I might have forgotten the tale, if not for what happened a week later. The envelope arrived unannounced, tucked into my mailbox like a secret. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in an angular, unfamiliar script. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore nothing but a set of coordinates and a single sentence. Come to hear the truth. I don't know what compelled me to act. Maybe it was boredom, or curiosity, or some inexplicable pull I couldn't name. The coordinates led to a remote stretch of forest deep in the Appalachians, far from any marked trails. With every mile I drove, the trees grew denser, their skeletal branches intertwining to block out the sky. The road ended abruptly at a weathered trailhead, a crude wooden sign warning hikers to proceed at their own risk. By the time I reached the area indicated by the coordinates, the sun had set, plunging the forest into an oppressive gloom. My flashlight's beam barely cut through the dark, the shadows closing in with every step. Then I saw it, the entrance to the cavern. It was a gaping maw in the earth, half hidden by twisted roots and jagged rocks. Cold air seeped out, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my throat tighten. As I stepped closer, my breath fogged in the unnatural chill. There was no sign, no marker, no indication that anyone had ever set foot here before. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting to see if I would dare to enter. I swallowed hard, gripping my flashlight tighter. And then I stepped inside. The cavern's mouth swallowed the light. As I stepped deeper, the beam from my flashlight illuminated the walls, smooth and glistening with condensation, like the ribcage of some enormous, slumbering beast. The air grew colder still, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The first sound came just as I rounded the corner of the initial passageway. A faint whisper echoed through the tunnel, barely audible over the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. "Hello?" I called instinctively, my voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Hello?" The echo came back immediately, a perfect imitation of my voice, though something about it felt off. It was too fast, too sharp, as though the cave had anticipated my words before I'd spoken them. I froze, listening. The silence pressed in again, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. I shook my head, cursing myself for letting Neil's campfire tale get to me. But as I moved further, the whispers grew louder. They were faint at first, just at the edge of hearing. Snatches of conversation, fragmented and distorted, their source impossible to pinpoint. I stopped again, sweeping my flashlight in a slow arc. The walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light, the shadows twisting in ways that made my stomach lurch. Then I heard it. "Help me." The voice was mine. It came from further ahead, faint but unmistakable. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" the cavern repeated, my own words warped and broken. I tried to convince myself it was just an echo, that the acoustics of the cave were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The voice hadn't come from behind me. It had come from somewhere deeper within. I pressed forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers grew, overlapping into a dissonant chorus, filling the air with fragments of speech that seemed to burrow into my mind. "Why are you here? Go back. Help me." It was impossible to tell which were echoes and which were real. My breath came faster, fogging in the cold, as the whispers twisted into a language I couldn't understand. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. My flashlight revealed scattered remnants, a torn backpack, a shattered helmet, and climbing gear scattered across the floor. The sight froze me in place. "Don't listen to them," a voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere. I spun around, but there was no one there. The air itself seemed alive, pressing against my ears like a physical force. And then I heard my own voice again, loud and clear, calling from the darkness ahead. "Come here, help me." I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed for me to run. But something deeper pulled me forward, something I couldn't explain. A magnetic force, as if the cavern itself wanted me to go deeper. The walls began to pulse faintly in the light, the stone glistening like skin stretched too tightly over bone. And the whispers grew louder still, their tones rising and falling like a twisted melody. "Help us. Stay with us. Stay." My voice was among them now, mingling with the others. I couldn't tell if it was calling to me or warning me away. I stood frozen in the wide chamber, my flashlight's beam flickering as it swept over the detritus of those who'd come before me. The abandoned climbing gear and shredded fabric told a story of panic, as if the owners had fled in haste or been taken. The cavern walls loomed, glistening wetly like the hide of some great beast. Every shadow seemed alive, curling and stretching just beyond the edges of the light. The whispers had softened, merging into a dissonant hum that thrummed against my skull. I moved cautiously, my boots crunching over scattered pebbles. The air felt heavier here, thicker, as if it resisted every step. My flashlight flickered again, and my breath caught as I glimpsed something, a faint outline in the darkness ahead. At first, I thought it was another climber. The figure stood motionless, barely visible in the dim glow of my light. Relief warred with fear in my chest. "Hey," I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you all right?" The figure didn't respond. I took a step closer, my light focusing on it. And that's when I saw it wasn't human. The shape was vaguely humanoid but wrong, its edges indistinct, as if it were made of mist or shadow that refused to settle into a solid form. My light seemed to pass through it, scattering into faint tendrils that drifted like smoke. But its face, or where its face should have been, was what stopped me cold. It was me. Not a reflection, not a shadow, but a distorted mimicry of my own features. Its head tilted, almost curiously, and its mouth moved silently, as if trying to form words. Then it spoke. "Help me." The voice was mine, but hollow, stripped of all emotion. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hand. "What the hell are you?" "What the hell are you?" it repeated, but its tone was warped now, the words stretched and cracked like old vinyl. It began to move, stepping forward with a jerky, unnatural gait, its limbs bending at impossible angles. I turned and ran. The chamber seemed to stretch endlessly as I fled, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly over the glistening walls. The whispers rose behind me, no longer faint, but screaming in a cacophony of voices. My voice, pleading, accusing, demanding. "You can't leave. Come back. Stay." I tripped over something, a discarded helmet, and hit the ground hard, the impact jarring the flashlight from my grip. Darkness swallowed me whole. Panic surged in my chest as I scrambled blindly, my hands searching the cold, damp floor for the flashlight. The whispers closed in, louder and closer, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and impossibly loud in the suffocating silence. "Help me," the mimic said again, its voice now coming from directly behind me. My fingers finally found the flashlight, and I snapped it on, whipping around to face the figure. It was closer now, no more than a few feet away. Its form had solidified, the features of my own face sharper and more defined, but grotesquely exaggerated. Its eyes were sunken hollows, its smile too wide and stretched at odd angles. "I'm you," it whispered. "No," I choked out, backing away. "Yes," it insisted, taking another step closer. "I know you. I know your fears, your regrets." Its voice fractured, splitting into multiple overlapping tones, each one clawing at my sanity. "You can't leave. You belong here. Stay. Stay. Stay." Summoning every ounce of willpower, I swung the flashlight at the thing. The beam struck it square in the chest, and for a moment it recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Taking the chance, I scrambled to my feet and bolted, not daring to look back. The whispers continued to pursue me, echoing through the tunnels, growing fainter as I ran. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I was lost. The tunnels had twisted and branched, leading me deeper into the labyrinth. The air was colder now, each breath scraping against my lungs like shards of ice. My flashlight flickered weakly, its battery drained from the hours I'd spent underground. The whispers were distant, but constant, like the murmur of a restless crowd. They seemed to pulse with a rhythm, one that matched the pounding of my heart. As I rounded a corner, the tunnel abruptly widened into a massive chamber. My flashlight revealed the walls, which were covered in strange, jagged markings. They weren't carvings. They pulsed faintly, glowing with an eerie phosphorescence that bathed the chamber in a sickly green light. At the center of the chamber, the source of the glow revealed itself. A vast, black void, a hole in the stone that seemed to absorb all light and sound. I approached cautiously, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The whispers were louder here, clearer. They weren't just echoes, they were voices. My voice. I knelt at the edge of the void, staring into its unfathomable depths. The darkness moved, swirling like liquid, reflecting the faint green glow from the walls. My own reflection stared back at me from the surface of the void, but it wasn't just a reflection. It moved independently, its gaze locking onto mine with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The mimic's voice rose from the void, echoing all around me. "This is the heart. This is where we live." "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "We are the echoes," it said, its tone dripping with malice. We are the voices that never stop, the faces that never fade. We are what remains when you lose yourself. I felt a cold hand grip my arm. Spinning around, I came face to face with my doppelganger. Its eyes were no longer hollow. They burned with a sickly green light. "You are already one of us," it said. "No," I gasped, wrenching my arm free. "I'm not." The mimic smiled, a grotesque parody of my own expression. "You will be. The cavern keeps what it takes." The walls began to pulse violently, the green light intensifying until it seared my vision. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, each voice overlapping, screaming, laughing, crying. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging the chamber into total darkness. I felt the ground shift beneath me, as though the cavern itself was alive, drawing me closer to the void. I clawed at the stone, desperate to escape, but the pull was too strong. "Stay," the voices chanted in unison. Summoning the last shred of my strength, I hurled the dead flashlight into the void. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, momentarily breaking the whispers. In the brief silence that followed, I turned and ran, the green glow fading behind me. The tunnels seemed to collapse around me as I fled, the walls pressing closer, the floor crumbling beneath my feet. The whispers chased me, but their power was weakening, their calls growing fainter. I didn't stop until I burst out of the cavern into the freezing night air. But even as I stood there, gasping under the stars, I could still hear them, faint and mocking, just at the edge of my hearing. The cavern wasn't done with me. Not yet. The forest was silent as I staggered out of the cavern, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was suffocating, heavy with anticipation, as if the trees themselves were waiting, their skeletal branches twisted toward the starless sky like frozen claws. My breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the frigid air. The world outside felt unreal, distorted, as though the cavern's dark influence had followed me out into the night. My legs trembled, each step unsteady as I stumbled through the undergrowth. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig underfoot made me whip around, flashlight gripped tightly in my fist, even though it no longer worked. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Then I heard it. "Help me." It was faint at first, barely a whisper carried on the cold wind, but the voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the forest behind me was empty. The same words came again, louder this time, tinged with urgency. "Help me." It was my voice. My knees buckled as a wave of dread crashed over me. The whisper wasn't coming from behind me. It was ahead, deeper into the forest. My throat tightened, panic clawing at my chest as the realization hit. I hadn't left the cavern behind. I had brought it with me. I forced myself forward, every muscle screaming for me to turn back, to run in the opposite direction. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, until it wasn't just my voice anymore. "You can't leave," the voices chanted. "Come back. You belong here." The trees around me seemed to shift and sway, though there was no wind. Shadows bled across the ground, pooling unnaturally in the hollows of the forest floor. I glanced behind me, and my stomach dropped. Figures were emerging from the darkness. They were faint at first, like heat mirages, their forms flickering in and out of focus. But as they drew closer, I recognized them, not as individuals, but as distorted versions of myself. Their features were warped, their limbs elongated, their movements jerky and inhuman. And their faces. Every one of them wore my face, twisted into cruel, mocking parodies of my own expressions. Their mouths stretched too wide, their eyes hollow pits that glowed faintly in the dark. One of them spoke, its voice layered and fragmented, as if dozens of versions of me were speaking in unison. You can't escape us. You're one of us now. I ran. Branches tore at my arms and face as I crashed through the forest, my pulse pounding so loudly I could barely hear the whispers chasing me. But they were there, their cadence rising and falling, a dissonant chorus of voices that burrowed into my skull. Stay. 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 I stumbled into a clearing, my legs giving out beneath me. The sky above was impossibly dark, devoid of stars or moonlight. My breath came in shallow gasps as I scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of the figures that had been pursuing me. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. And then the ground beneath me shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor, like something stirring deep below the earth. Then, the dirt split open, and a black void began to seep upward, spreading like spilled ink. No, I whispered, scrambling backward. No, no, no. The void pulsed, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. My own voice cried out from the darkness, fractured and distorted. Don't fight it. Come back. It's safer here. From the edges of the void, the doppelgangers began to rise. They emerged slowly, their bodies forming from the inky blackness, like clay being shaped by unseen hands. Each one stared at me with a cold, predatory intensity, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. The largest of them stepped forward, its form more solid than the others. Its face was an almost perfect replica of mine, but its grin stretched too far, its teeth jagged and sharp. You belong to the echoes, it said, its voice reverberating like thunder. No, I screamed, scrambling to my feet. The void surged toward me, tendrils of darkness snaking across the ground. I turned to run, but the shadows moved faster, latching onto my legs and pulling me down. The cold was unbearable, like plunging into an icy river. My hands clawed at the earth, but it crumbled beneath my fingers, offering no escape. Stay, the voices chanted, their tone now commanding, almost triumphant. My vision blurred as the darkness crept higher, swallowing me inch by inch. I could feel the whispers pressing against my mind, their presence suffocating, overwhelming. For a moment I thought about giving in. It would be easier to let the cavern take me, to become one with the echoes. But then I remembered the light. The flashlight in my hand was dead, but it was still there, its cold metal casing a reminder of the world above, the real world. With a desperate cry, I swung the flashlight down into the tendrils, and to my shock, the shadows recoiled, hissing like steam on hot metal. I didn't hesitate. Gripping the flashlight like a weapon, I struck at the darkness again and again, each blow scattering the tendrils and weakening their hold. The doppelgangers screamed, their forms flickering and dissolving as the light pushed them back. The void trembled violently, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. And then, with a final deafening shriek, it collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I lay there for what felt like hours, the cold earth pressing against my back as I stared up at the empty sky. My body ached, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. When I finally found the strength to stand, the forest was still. The air was cold but no longer oppressive, and the shadows no longer moved on their own. I stumbled toward the distant glow of dawn, each step taking me further from the cavern's reach. But then I remembered the light. The flashlight in my hand was dead, but it was still there, its cold metal casing a reminder of the world above, the real world. With a desperate cry, I swung the flashlight down into the tendrils, and to my shock, the shadows recoiled, hissing like steam on hot metal. I didn't hesitate. Gripping the flashlight like a weapon, I struck at the darkness again and again, each blow scattering the tendrils and weakening their hold. The doppelgangers screamed, their forms flickering and dissolving as the light pushed them back. The void trembled violently, its surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. And then, with a final deafening shriek, it collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I lay there for what felt like hours, the cold earth pressing against my back as I stared up at the empty sky. My body ached, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. When I finally found the strength to stand, the forest was still. The air was cold, but no longer oppressive, and the shadows no longer moved on their own. I stumbled toward the distant glow of dawn, each step taking me further from the cavern's reach. But even now, as I sit here in the safety of my home, I can still hear them. Faint whispers in the quiet moments, just at the edge of hearing. They're waiting, and they know I'll hear them again.